I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my feature author of the month of November, of course, award winning author, Mr. Gerald Everett Jones. Thank you so much, Mr. Gerald, for having you. And on this podcast, as usual, can you please introduce yourself again?
Gerald Everett Jones. I use my full name because there are just a few other fellows named Jones
Yes.
writing books, and there's even some other Gerald Joneses. And then there's Jerry Jones, who owns the Dallas Cowboys. That's not me. So, but I've been writing books most of my working life, and I began by writing business and technical books. And I got a lot of good, what you would call seat of the pants training back then. My editor said, put your butt in the chair every day. That was his instruction. And I did turn to writing novels about almost 20 years ago, and I've written 14 novels in that length of time. And today I believe we're going to talk about the Preacher Evan Wycliff mystery series,
Yes.
of which there are 4 books. And the one we're showing on the screen is the third one in the series, Preacher Raises the Dead.
Wow, amazing. Again, Mr. Gerald, thank you so much for sharing your talent to the world. Thank you so much. I hope more award winning things to come. And what inspired you to write this novel or this mystery?
Well, my family going a couple of generations back is from southern Missouri, which is mostly farm country. And that is where this series is based. Also, I was raised in the Southern Baptist Church,
Yes.
and that also is very much part of this series because Preacher Evan Wycliff, the main character, is a Baptist minister. But in many ways, he is something of a doubter. Some people think of him as agnostic.
Yes.
And yet, because he seems to somehow get to the bottom of problems nobody else wants to solve, other people think of him as almost a faith healer. So it's a very small community in this rural area. And Evan is a young man. He's not yet in this series. He's not yet 30, and he had gone to divinity school back east, and he became somewhat disillusioned with being a minister because he learned too much about the history of the church.
Baptist Church.
Yes, exactly. So then he decided he'd hop over from Harvard Divinity School to MIT and study astrophysics. And of course, he got no real solid answers there either. I mean, just last week we found out that oh no, the universe is probably twice as big as we thought, or maybe the Big Bang didn't happen. Maybe it's a series of smaller bangs. I mean,
Yes.
Science doesn't
Different.
give us exactly hard and fast answers. It's interesting that it's evolving all the time. But as I say, in this small town, the way people get their news is often gossip.
Yes.
I mean, even in today's world of social media, I mean, in some ways, we're all getting loads of gossip every day, and it's hard to separate the truth from the fiction. But Evan is a reluctant investigator, and in Preacher Raises the Dead, he's actually drawn into the ministry full time. He had been a guest preacher up to that point, and somewhat of his other day job was he was a skip tracer or a collection agent for loans for the local car dealership because he knew how to use a computer and he knew how to track down people. But this third book occurs at the beginning of COVID, and the fellow who had been the minister of the church in town decided he's going to retire, and he was something of Evan's mentor back from even his boyhood days. And so Evan reluctantly steps into the role of actual pastor for this church, and he finds he's got to do hospital visitations and funeral services and, well, at least weddings via Zoom during COVID.
Yes.
And so ministering to the sick and the dying is a big change for him. It's a lot more responsibility than he really wanted to take on. And then I suppose you might say this would be something of a spoiler, but he's become recently married, and she was not somebody that people thought of as a church lady. In fact, she was a cocktail waitress at the local casino. And interestingly enough, she took her role as minister's wife much more seriously than anybody expected. And she was very serious, took on the Loving Embrace Committee, which delivered hot meals to people and prayed at people's bedsides and whatever. So she was more of a church lady than a church lady in many ways, but it created a lot of stress on her. And she was so stressed out that once when she was driving, her car slipped from the road and she was in an auto accident and she was thrown into a coma. And it was a long-term coma. So here it's Evan's responsibility to visit the hospital regularly. And now here he is visiting his wife, who may not even know that he's there. She's in some other realm, but she's not dead. But the idea, I mean, certainly from the title, you'll understand that perhaps this isn't the end of the story. But, also Evan walks in on another individual, the wife of somebody that he knew, who experiences a near-death experience. She's already flatlined from cardiac arrest. They were about to pronounce her dead, and she sits up in the bed. So again, you've got this gossip about Evan as the faith healer. He walked in on Ann Shackleton and she sat up and praised God. Well, that's not exactly what happened, but that's the way the gossip got spun.
Yes. We learn news through gossip, even before and now, and I think for the future too, the same style. So, Mr. Gerald, how did you develop compelling and relatable characters in the mystery?
Well, I think the idea that Evan, as a curious mind and a doubter, makes him the ideal amateur sleuth or reluctant investigator. And it's not that he wants to make a life or a hobby or a vocation of solving crime and mysterious disappearances and those kinds of things. But again, most of the things come to him, most of these situations come to him because the authorities have given up on them. You might call them cold cases. In other cases, you might simply call it mysterious disappearance. And unless they can find a body they can autopsy, they don't necessarily know that somebody's dead. They might have just gone off on a bender. They might have just run away from home. They might have left their wife and their children. So, those kinds of things happen as well. And he's something of a counselor of last resort. And the fact that he is somebody who keeps an open mind and doesn't give up when everybody else has lost hope
it's just not a matter. It's not a matter of getting down on your knees and praying. It's a matter of being open to whatever you might discover, and that's as much a scientific point of view as it is a religious point of view. Is I'm going to form a theory, and let's see whether observation confirms or denies it. Well, if I find some observation that doesn't fit with my theory, at least the scientist will say, I'm going to change my theory.
For
we,
sure.
we don't find too many conservative theologians rewriting the Bible. We certainly do find many people in various Christian religions interpreting the Bible in different ways, as we understand it's necessary to do in this latter day, when we have a 2,000-year-old New Testament that was written primarily for a tribal people in the deserts of Palestine. And though, well, for example, it was a routine thing in those days, for even at the Jewish temple, for people to bring or pay for animal sacrifice. And if you couldn't afford a pigeon, then you'd buy a mouse. I mean, it was, and the Romans did the same thing, and there were certainly many ancient cultures before that also believed in animal sacrifice, and then somewhat the human sacrifice as well. And so one wonders whether the Passion of Christ is based and derived in a way that this is the only way people would believe that God cared about them, and which seems a rather primitive mentality. I mean, I don't know that anybody thinks these days that someone has to be slain to show that that I mean, wars don't really achieve very much, and there's a lot of slaying on both sides. But at the end of things, it's usually some kind of negotiated settlement, which might have been had at the very beginning if all that carnage hadn't taken place. So we hope with the new year coming that we will see some of those conflicts, perhaps all those conflicts, at least resolved in some way that causes less suffering and less.
Yes, we hope. We pray for peace, people, this coming 2025. So, Mr. Gerald, what techniques did you use to create a strong and engaging plot structure?
Well, I've mentioned this on your broadcast before, but when I did business and technical books, I did those for mainstream publishers, and I had to submit an outline. And I had an editor who supervised that outline, and if I wanted to depart from that outline, I had to ask permission. And I had to give him a good reason why I was going to change it. And in fiction, I began writing that way because I had been disciplined to do that. And then actually in the beginning, there were a couple of my screenplays, my unsold screenplays, that I had turned into novels. And the screenplay itself became a structure because I didn't want to depart from it too much. I wanted it to be essentially the same story. So that became a structure. But as I got especially into writing mysteries, I began to trust not knowing where I was going more. And it, instead of being a chance, facing that white page, that blank page being a challenge or a discouragement, it became an adventure and a thrill that I wanted to dive into. I was glad that there was nothing on that page. And I felt as though if I didn't know where it was going, that my finding out where it did go would surprise and delight myself, and hopefully that would surprise and delight the reader as well. And in many of these Preacher Evan Wycliff mysteries, I usually have a small group of beta readers, colleagues that I send my drafts to, at least my revised final drafts. And a number of them have said, I didn't really know what was going on until the last page. I didn't know how that was going to resolve. And I said, well, guess what? I didn't either. And, so that's how you can tell. So I would say writing by, if you will, the subconscious is it's a challenging way to write, but it's an adventuresome way to write. And, people will say, well, I get my best ideas in the shower. Well, that's not a coincidence from a scientific point of view. The shower is white noise. So
Yes.
white noise stimulates your brain in ways that just a normal conversation or even meditation might not. So you may discover new thoughts just by turning on the water faucet. I have a friend who he asks himself a question, then he takes a walk around the block. That's
Yes.
another way to do it.
That'd be awesome. Very well said. Very well said, Mr. Gerald. So, how did you decide on the narrative perspective of this mystery?
I don't think that you knew that was a spin question, but yes, it's a spin question, and I won't say that it's embarrassing to answer, but the first 3 books in this series are written in the third person. And the last book in the series, Preacher Stall's The Second Coming, is written in the first person. It's written as though Evan wrote it as a journal. And I can't really explain in a logical way why I was motivated to do it that way. I suppose the first day that I was staring at that blank page, it just came out that I was using I instead of he. But I think also that more than all of the books delve into his mind, and you're writing along with his reflections and his inquiries and his frustrations, if you will. So it's very he's in his head a lot, and the readers, if you don't like being in your own head, you're not going to like mystery. So presumably readers like to be in their heads as well. But in this third one, I just felt like much of the time he was in his head, and I mean in the fourth one, in Preacher Stall's The Second Coming, and a lot of it has to do with conflicts in his mind about his religious upbringing and what he'd been taught, and the fact that he just simply feels, as do some people, that the Book of Revelation is just somebody's acid trip. It's just like, why would you base international policy on visions that Saint John, and he was what, the 5th Saint John that came along? He wasn't even necessarily the guy who wrote the Book of John. He was freezing in a cave up. He was running from the legions of the Roman emperor, and he was hiding out in a windswept cave on the top of the island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea. And it's freaking cold up there. Okay, I visited that site. Okay, so he only gets to eat when people smuggle him in meals. He's got a scribe that he's sitting there with, and I can just imagine what that, when there's a violent sea storm, what that place would be like. And yes, you could say that the Book of Revelation fulfills many of the predictions, prophecies in the Book of Daniel, but the Bible scholars will tell you that the book of Daniel was written centuries later than people thought that it was, and it's very possible that Saint John, the author of the book of the Revelation, would have been had a very detailed scholarship and study of the book of Daniel, so that it wouldn't be surprising that the book of Revelation echoed the book of Daniel. So again, not to create religious arguments here, I suppose today you'd call me a profound I don't knowist. I don't know whether you'd say that that's agnostic. I certainly have what I think is a very thoughtful spiritual life, but it's very difficult for me to think of myself as certainly not as an evangelical. I am a child of the Christian tradition, and I think Christian ethics have done a lot to shape my philosophy of life. So, it's not like I left it all behind. But bottom line on that, and I think that this probably is worth saying, is there are people who ask me, "Is this Christian fiction?" And I would say, well, no, I wouldn't say so, in the sense that a lot of Christian fiction is written from the standpoint of it's written for believers to reinforce their faith. And I would say, no, this is a look inside the mind of someone who has one foot in the field of science and one foot in the field of religion and can't really decide which way to walk. And I feel as though that is a broader audience. It's certainly a more, well, skeptical is a strong word, but it's a more skeptical audience. But you see, again, the mystery genre craves a certain skeptical, cynical point of view because, well, Evan's from Missouri. Missouri is a show me state. If you don't show me, I won't believe it. So you could say that might be another reason why it got set there.
For sure. Totally agree, Mr. Gerald. So what strategies did you use to overcome writer's block when you're writing this mystery?
Well, the as I say, the blank page is not a discouragement anymore. So, as my editor said way back in the day, put your butt in the chair every day. That's really the main thing. If you want to keep from being bored, you'd better say something.
For sure.
That would be my advice. And I don't believe, as some writers do, that the 20th draft is going to be better than the second draft. I don't think that writing and rewriting continuously necessarily makes it better. I think sometimes the inspiration can get lost and the enthusiasm can get lost. And I think that, making it, making a change might make it different, but doesn't necessarily make it better. So I think you need to be careful about that. I mean, in Hollywood, there's a saying that no joke survives the third draft. So if it takes the comedy out of it, maybe it also takes some of the mystery out of it.
So what is the research process for this mystery?
With the mystery series and the Preacher Evan Wycliff series, a lot of it has to do with thinking back on my childhood experiences in that environment, in that small farming community. I grew up in Kansas City in the big town, but I was often taken by my grandparents to the country for long weekends and, hunting and fishing and I can't say I wasn't really old enough for horseback riding, but they did put me on the back of a horse for a few times. And I got to pet the sheep. And then at my great aunt's house, my grandfather kept saying, well, don't step in the duck shoe polish. And it took me a while to realize what that was, but they had so many ducks that, yes, the sidewalk, there was a narrow sidewalk, even in farm country there was a narrow concrete sidewalk leading up to their porch. And it was usually littered with duck droppings. So yes, I had to make sure my U.S. kids didn't step in the shoe polish.
So, Mr. Gerald, to sum up our discussion, how do you stay motivated and disciplined in writing this mystery?
Well, I also do work as a developmental editor. I also do coach other authors, and I find that that's also fulfilling from the standpoint of helping others express themselves, especially if they're new to the process. Because they say, well, I want to write a book, or, I always wanted to write a book, or, I've got this story in me, but I don't know how. I mean, this is, self-expression. I mean, one of my favorite expressions is storytelling builds community. And if you want to reach out, then express what's in your heart. That's absolute gold for other people to pick up and to profit from and to benefit from. So that would be my wish for anyone who really wishes to tell their story. And
Yes,
your story, if it's told from your heart, is not going to be the same as anyone else's.
definitely. And stop procrastinating, people. Right, right, right. A lot of people out there want to start writing, but they start procrastinating. Share your talents to the world because it's really important. It will be your legacy from our generations to generations to come, just like Mr. Gerald Everett Jones, award-winning author. So, Mr. Gerald, what would be your last advice for our aspiring writers out there?
GeraldEverettJones.com, and you can see there on the screen how to spell it with 2 T's. And there are review copies there. There's my entire list of published books. There's biography. There's interviews, and then also my Substack blog, Thinking About Thinking. And I will also tell you that today,
Yes.
we're in Black Friday week.
Yes.
Today,
Sale.
the first book in the Preacher Evan Wycliff series, Preacher Finds a Corpse, is free in ebook format, EPUB and Kindle. So free. Go get it while it still costs $0.
Yes. Yes, people, let's support Mr. Gerald Everett Jones because if you support him, more award-winning piece, more mystery to come. So, Mr. Gerald, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being part of Book 101 Review.
It has been a thrilling month. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. More to come, people. See you soon.